Good afternoon, gentle readers. Today is November 7, 2024, from a desk with Ross Finlayson here in Seattle, Washington. A sunny, chill day. Today I thought I would speak again to the philosophical foreground. So, over the past year or so, there was a moment in motion kind of recorded, and what that involves is a technical account of the theory and the history of the theory of the mechanics of motion and the philosophical endeavors what are so relevant to establishing a deconstructive account of what makes for a thorough and historically advised and a historiographical account, paleoclassical in that sense, and as well a modern and postmodern and nouveau theory as with regards to the premier theories of the day. So a moment in motion kind of is wrapped up in that sense with regards to arriving at some definitions of motion, and particularly the outlay of some mathematical objects that become relevant with regards to the surrounds and the wider milieu of the dialectic beyond the classical, is kind of after Lagrange, and the notion of the Lagrangian is a differential system parameterized by time, as after the Hamiltonian, and kind of that being an abstraction and reduced by Jacobi, as after Descartes kind of had a greater outlay of the mechanics, and that being reduced quite thoroughly to the linear. And then with regards to the definition of momentum as arrives today, then it became that was kind of the consideration as parts of moment and motion, and that geometry is motion. And that perspective and projection are always part of the accoutrement as with regards to the geometry, and then the separation of the details of the observer vis-a-vis the mutual as with regards to the linear and rotational, the kinetic and kinematic, the severe abstraction to the mechanical reduction, which is then to arrive for a greater explanation of the virtual and fictitious, which somehow are all together in this sum of histories, sum of potentials theory overall. That, of course, followed the descriptive differential dynamics, a second course after a university degree in mathematics, and with what that entails in the usual sense of the applied and dynamical modeling. And again, a few kind of novel mathematical objects and structures, and relating those to, as well, a modern theory of the objects of continuity and infinity in mathematics with regards to the usual reflection on the standard linear curriculum, and then the course is what arrives at a fuller, richer dialectic as after that. So that was is kind of as of in the background, or the readings as they've been here. And then there's also the study of Einstein's Out of My Later Years, which is a pretty great work where he helps us establish that what's arrived at is a simple negative stipulation with regards to the absolutes, the ideals, the relativity of motion with regards to observers, and then as well it was established that Einstein's own theory, in his own words, makes for that the space contraction instead of length contraction and time dilation apart, together a space contraction, the Fitzgeraldian sort of way is for what results for Lorentzian, and what makes for a Galilean, then is for, and as regards why the linear and rotational is separated, and that the formal accounts of mass energy equivalency with regards to Einstein's usual equations as applied to the rotational in this setting. This was arrived at as world's turn vis-a-vis the usual laws of motion as linear, and then that also there was considered the V viva and V motrix and V's and theta with regards to heft as an introduced quantity in classical mechanics. So that then for Einstein and relativity, there was also the reading from the path integral, and that remains much to be seen about it. And there's some consideration with regards to the theory of the quantum electrodynamics and how they're just virtual particles that don't really exist or have any kind of other physical properties except as so connect in the brief diagrams or the Feynman diagrams and these notions to make for the path integral that adds up that then as well, of course, the readings from Feynman and his lecture notes and the attention he pays to that it's not a closed story really are considered of some value and of some insight that's otherwise, again, in a usual inductive, coherent, correspondent, pragmatist sense of what things are, is not always so necessarily well reflected when as well they're struggling with nihilism, existentialism, and other aspects of logical positivism after scientism and Kant and such, and Russell and Boole, and then as with regards to that the carriage then of the wider dialectic in terms of logical theories then is a big deal. Of course, any foundations has to be all of a logic, a mathematics, and a physics as a science. And then it's usually considered that logic and mathematics are Platonic, and for strong mathematical Platonism, and that science and then after physics is after logical positivism and strong logical positivism. And with regards, as discussed here often, the teleological and the ontological and the technical analytic and the logical of the philosophy, as with regards to why it's arrived at. Then the physics, it can be seen also as a mathematical object. So that in foundations, it's one theory, it's a theory of everything, and we attain to it with the best of our science and the greatest and premier theories of the day and all the data. So what I've done is I've collected some more books and works in philosophy, and the idea is to get some more of some survey into the philosophy, because it is the study of thinking and reason itself. And so then when that kind of it gets emitted into either an axiomatic treatment or laws or principles or rules, the rule, that then it still is, as of the full and wide dialectic, why it has to be kind of taken into account as the sum of our histories and the sum of potentials, as with regards to a theory of truth, real truth, absolute truth, the truth logically, as a quantity and as the very object of the theory itself, what is. And so then this would often be as such matters reflections on being or sein. That in the philosophy there's largely a lexicon and a vocabulary from the ancient Greeks, and as after Plato and 500 years later Augustine and the canon and the dogma of treatises on reason and fact and truth, that those have arrived as from the classical. And then there's the continental or the German philosophers or Kant and Hegel, as after Descartes and Spinoza and Scotus, the medieval philosophers, Descartes kind of being the summation of that. And then there's Leibniz, and so these kind of reflect upon what are still today for something like the Leibnizian monadology and Descartes' worlds and analytical setting, as after analysis and the Muslim Enlightenment is what's arrived. That then the schools are that those are our canon, and the continental philosophy ends with amicus Plato again. So that's kind of been considered here and carried forward quite a bit. So then, as for the philosophy, there's some works collected. Then, to begin, in a sense, we kind of pointed at Aristotle, and so Aristotle here has had this great survey and collection made by Richard McKeon, an eminent philologist and classicist and a studier, the Distinguished Service Professor of Philosophy and Greek, and among his books are the Philosophy of Spinoza and Freedom and History, Thought, Action, and Passion, and the Freedom to Read. And this book has gone through about 30 publishings or so. It's from its original. It's still in print today. And so this is it covers again where the consideration here is mostly the technical philosophy, or how we arrive at reasoning, like a theory from nothing, as to how that's the same thing as a theory from everything, and that this dually self infraconsistency is a concept introduced to help explain how then there can be no logical paradoxes at all. So the idea is to have a philosophy that's a theory that's in no way paradoxical, yet as well embodies the entire logical comprehension. That's the thing. So many of these works, with regards to the ethics and so on in Aristotle, are considered more in the human social setting. And so then as with regards to the establishment of ethics and morals, that's considered a matters of that there are notions of good and virtue, and so that they are in a sense absolute and ideals, and then that's usually reflected upon as the golden rules, as with regards to interobjectivity and intersubjectivity. That said, as abstractly that's a fair account. Then again, more the interest here is on the technical and the logical, how we can arrive at a theory from nothing, because we can't say anything without it being unfounded. And so then when the first opinions arise is to say, well, we're going to have a theory of one relation logically and call it set theory. And then we're going to have a few axioms that expand comprehension, and that's considered that anything that exists. And then there's a few axioms that restrict comprehension. It's like these rules keep things simplest enough that there's still quite a bit of it. And then a few rules kind of combine those, and the result being what's called Russell's retrothesis, is with regards to the extraordinary, or Mirimanoff's great input to what relates to the Kant's sublime. That these are the notions that end up making for the extraordinary, why there's this theory that altogether makes it so that there's nothing wrong with it and there's nothing missing from it. And at the same time, whereas some of the other efforts might arrive at that there's no way to arrive at it, others arrive at that there's no way not to arrive at it. And then that other theories with axioms or axiomatics that aren't axiomless natural deduction is making for an axiomless geometry, which relates very well to number theory, and axiomless, in a sense, number theory. That the Platonic ideals arise as for these objects of reasoning, and that's been the theory for thousands and thousands of years. It's only recently that we have as well this complement of the logicist positivism, that everything has to be kind of axiomatized and stipulated, the formal, as with regards to the logical, and then the positivist as with regards to that which it gets into the scientific method and the statistical method, that those are still quite well founded, and for what they are in terms of the intersubjectivity, that there's still realist interobjectivity, and that bringing those together can make for, after a modern deconstructive account, fulfilling the greater theory of these things, and while still having basically a free range of thought, but not having let it go entirely into the non-objective, as it were. So Aristotle's great. Scholars have differed concerning the authenticity, order, and relation of Aristotle's works. Some have found a unity in them so precise and well articulated that every science and art and every body of conclusions, and even the meanings, applications, and functions of every word can be accounted for and justified. Others have found masses of contradictions and collections of cliches, half-truths, and palpable errors. Still others have found stages of development which require the reordering of the works and their parts into those which are Platonic, those which mark a skeptical doubt and tentative transition, and those which developed a characteristic, mature, empirical method and philosophy. There have been many interpretations of Aristotle, and grounds have been found in his writings and his times for each of them. Then this gets into, for example, the energy and entelechy and dynamis and dunamis, as with regards to the state of things and the potential of things, are some of history, some of potentials. That among Aristotle's greater contributions are both the prior and the posterior analytics, the before and the after, the inductive and the deductive. Then, as with regards to the empirical, that's as well as related to the purely theoretical. Here is that the empirical is considered on the side of the ontology and a body of knowledge, and that the purely theoretical is considered as on the side of the Platonic or the ideal or the absolute. And then as a source of authority, of course, anything trying to claim a source of authority has to relate it to itself in terms of these terms. And so one can often find that people have taken a track from Aristotle of only adopting some of his works and taking that sort of a half-truth, as McKeon put it, and that would be suitable for the usual practical purposes or their ends. But it's not necessarily so to be given that without a fuller account that it's anything more than that. So this is, of course, is a great reference, and you can find it in every university library. Book on language, Joshua Whatmough, mentor on language. There's been discussion hereafter, for example, George Steiner and his writings on Heidegger, and it's about philology and linguistics. We can't say things we don't have words for, and so the maturity and development of a language goes a long way. That you have to learn the big words to be able to let them out. And it goes without saying that limitations in vocabulary and the lexicon lead to a hobbling of the realm of deliberation and contemplation. And so as we hope to make reasonable sense of things, then language is key. The de facto position of English as an almost worldwide language cannot be ascribed solely to the fact that it has a great many attractive, progressive qualities, but the fact of their existence is not to be denied. English has a great store and wordshots or treasure of copulas which connect things together. And then the usual notion of the prepositions and the adjectival force as related to the accidents of English grammar really makes sure that English is quite a thorough and full language. And that as well, there's been so much of the development into the technical portion of it that it's well arrived at that any natural language is suitable for any matters of relation. Yet at the same time, the equi-interpretability of these languages, for what they relay is the equity interpretability of the underlying theoretical models, which are the structures that are arrived at as embodying fact, make for that. There's much to be said for the technical, that natural languages can reflect the symbolic or the purely logical, as with regards to the necessity to understand, and by saying that, what I mean is to formalize and prove that the ambiguity is eliminated, or as with regards to that it takes no more than a merely generous reading to arrive at common understandings of these things with regards to language and communication. So communication is intersubjective, meaning that from one side or the other of a communication, either only has a subjective agreement. And then there's these golden rules of communication that are referred to as Grice's communication, as with regards to the information contained with them, and that given understandings, where understanding is basically includes the not understanding. that there's as well the intelligence for the and the science is with regards to the understandings and the theories. So there's something you said for that. And he talks a little bit about the brain and the statistical. Upright posture had a profound effect upon the vocal apparatus. He discusses matters of senses in language. Doctrinal statements about language, when professedly intended to be statements about it as a variety of cultural behavior, have not achieved any clear or convincing correlation between the two. See, here it's that they don't necessarily have one. So now, of course, correlation and causation and absence and evidence are things related and not related to each other. Yet it goes as well to say that many things can over time be encountered, assimilated, internalized, digested, organized, as with regards to eventually the internalization of concepts. And then as with regards to those being fungible to the reasoning apparatus and to turn them over. They're knockabout and this kind of thing. We say that language mirrors the psyche and it the culture of a language community. There are no metaphysical assumptions here. There are many implicits and unstated reasonings that go into a statement. He said metaphysics, so now we have one. And then he gets into the phenomenological and the usual notions that the phenomenological has a separation, according to Kant, of the phenomenon and the noumenon. So the nous is the thinking, like the nootropic is that which widens the mind. Because the phenomenological is that which is according to the matters of senses, essentially intersubjective. That the nous results as ideas, which is that if we're thinking the same thing, then that's interobjective. And so then there's a way to look at it in terms of this reasoning here, that there's the phenomenological of accordingly the five senses, and then there's these five object senses: an object sense, a number sense, a sense of the continuum, word sense, and then a sense of time. Those are essentially established as relating that even a model of thinking that's much, much less than an abstract human reasoner has these in a sense as according to any statement of their comprehension at all. So in this sense, it bridges the phenomenological and the noumenological with regards to Kant's noumenon and with regards to the idea of Leibniz's monadology, which is the idea of any subjective observer at all as a monad. But then somehow those are all together one as well again, itself, it's so being. Size, vocabulary, and also features of order and arrangement are significant. The longer any sequence is, the more likely it is that the identity of any given component is determined by that of the other components. So he gets in some of the notions of the linguistics, which go into the analysis of the linguistics merely and simply as by the surface of it. Then as with regards as to, as was discussed here earlier in the deconstructive accounts and the difference and the text, as with what there is that everybody has their own interpretation with regards to what can be the equity interpretable. Then the idea of formalism is to say that we have established most certainly that this is equity interpretable, that it's interpretable in both languages or from both perspectives as the same thing, representing the same model here of the structure of the theory. Now, as for a comment about model theory and proof theory, is that when you think about mathematics and mathematical proof as for mathematical fact, then you'd often associate that most directly with the idea that there's a proof of it, that for a given theory or a given conjecture that there's a proof of it. So model theory is equi-interpretable in the sense with proof theory, in the sense that they're meant to arrive at the same thing. And then there's two things to consider with regards to brief models, ad hoc or templates or working or self-contained or contingent models, small models, which represent some facts and relations, and the idea that there is a universe or that there's a nothing in the universe the same, a model of objects of reason, truth, as with regards to a Comenius language, where then we can have a space for these concepts. It's the space of words as well, the Comenius language, and then way underneath that we have our Comenius Coleridge language, which is a sense in the spirit of the poesy to be able to relay and understand and comprehend that and comprehend these things. Written material in a totally unknown script usually seems to present an insoluble problem, or unsoluble, as the author puts it. In the famous cases like Egyptian hieroglyphic or Persian cuneiform, the first step was actually a lucky guess. And then we usually find what would be concordances, or it's like the Rosetta Stone, which was discovered and it had written in 3 different languages some ancient scripts. Thusly, for example, among the ways like the Aramaic and the Egyptian and the languages is of after the Atlantean or the Phoenician, and as with regards to later the Teutonic languages, or the spread of language as what's presumed is after the prehistoric Bronze Age and the era of the Atlantean, which bridges the Atlantic Ocean and makes for the same words in Mesoamerica and in the Mediterranean for things like famous figures, for stars in the sky by their names, for personages of deities and such. That as well, the most varied languages have arrived from Africa. And so there's, if you find a book that's got like a dictionary of all the world's languages known today, it's got some 80-some languages distinct out of Africa. And then many dialects, and then as with regards to languages since recorded history, back to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and then getting back further into the Iron and Bronze Age, or 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 years ago, that around the world there's words that are the same. Mother, tooth, the names for stars in the sky, and so on. And then what's arrived as our phonetic alphabet is as well very, very widely spread. And for example, Mesoamerican and Mediterranean. So much to be said for that. He mentions the Coptic and the Persians and phonemes. This is with regards to lexemes and codemes. It appears likely, simply in terms of regional examination of the human living brain and its functioning, that speech and thought are very much connectable, with thought in quotes. So that's just an interesting kind of development, and it helps to relate that concepts are ideal and Platonic, and as well they can be related. And then the more universal they are is how they rise up above the plainly animal, that man is machine, man is animal, man is mind, and then that language is basically an exercise in mind. Yeah. That I thought that was an interesting book, and I'll look forward to reading a little bit. The Ancient Greeks, M.I. Finley, he's got a book on the Ancient Greeks. I don't have too much expectation from this. This is mostly a social study. He has some histories as with regards to the men and women, the people of ancient Greece, the Greco-Scythians, as with regards to the Phoenicians, the Grecians, the Hellenes, wider Macedon, and the Persian and Macedonian Empire, that from about 800 BC to 0 AD, and again, further backwards than that, reflects, as we read, for example, from that Joseph Campbell, that it was the sort of world civilization of the time. The Persians and the Mithraic is what became the Zoroastrian, that about 1,000 years later arrived at the advent of Christianity and Buddhism. Those then kind of post-dating the Vedics and the Sanskrit, and also as well the Egyptians, the Middle Egyptians. And here he does have some mention here of Plato. And it discusses some of the difference between Athens and Sparta. and it discusses their politics in a sense, and their social contracts as they were. He mentions Hammurabi. So the Code of Hammurabi is usually held up as the oldest extant common law. Whereas, well, then many of the things that came down as recorded of the law were, for example, food laws like kosher or halal, which is the idea that various practices and prohibitions were set in place without necessarily there's today what we say would be a scientific explanation that yet had their strengths for these reasons. Again, largely based upon the golden rule, and it's pretty much universal form of reciprocity in all societies and cultures. Vis-a-vis this, if we speak to the Mithraics, something about the dualist nature of things, where they kind of have good versus evil, or good vis-a-vis evil, that then those are along the lines of that today we'd say something like, for example, for the Chinese, that there's the Confucian and is after Lao Tse, these rules of governance and citizenry, vis-a-vis like the Shang, that you kind of relate that to something like something so far different as the American ideals of individual liberty and egalitarianism, vis-a-vis Machiavellian or the rule of the mob and these kinds of things, which are considered anathema variously to each other. They are considered at odds and opposites. And then thusly, that's just part of the discussion that there is this deductive account to help extract otherwise would merely be inductive accounts that can never be resolved. So that gets into some of the ideas that are still the same today. This is good, and I'm looking forward to reading it some more. Nelson Goodman is a philosopher of the 20th century. So fast forward 2,500 years. Sense and certainty. He says he read this earlier in his career. Hans Reichenbach and my former teacher, C.I. Lewis. Now, I kind of like Lewis, is from what I've learned a little bit about him, because I'm not so much into Dewey or James. And these were kind of held up as like after reading from the modern philosophy history as one of these works here, and it came up to James and Dewey. I don't really find those as very compelling philosophically at all. They're logical positivists, and in the sense that they're weak logical positivists, I have a rejection of that because I find it not very thorough, and I think it's hypocritical. But then there's much to be said for CLS. But then these thinkers like Goodman here, and then I have some other things I found that I thought would be related to modern or 20th century American philosophers that are considered technical and excellent. Then as with regards to Collingwood and Nelson Goodman here, and then also there was something else that I had found recently. This Winston Barnes, The Philosophical Predicament. These each seem to reflect upon some ideals that get into issues with regards to the teleological and ontological, and the super scientific and the merely scientific, but the strongly logical positivist, for the weakly logical positivist. That then this Nelson Goodman seems pretty good in his Problems and Projects. A context of inquiry rather than of indulgence or incitement may result in a characteristic displacement of emotion. The frequent disparity between the emotion felt and the emotive content thereby discovered in the object is now readily understood. Pity. Emotions function cognitively, not as separate items, but in combination with one another and with other means of knowing. So the emotion is it's generally reflected in kind of the lizardian part of our brains, the animal part of our brains. As with regards to, as Einstein put it one time, there are two motivators, pleasure and fear. As with regards to things like the pleasure principle, vis-a-vis that we also have modern psychologies that help arrive at deconstructive accounts of that. So that, you can't make excuses for free will by fate or destiny, and that is well, it's to be understood that their drives and emotions of beliefs, desires, and motivations that include the subconscious, the unconscious, that here the author addresses to some extent in discussing art and inquiry, as with regards to art as an expression, either way, merit as means. Again, this is kind of with regards to art. The calculus of individuals was developed not merely for its own sake, but as an instrument for dealing with an infuriating problem, the difficulty of imperfect community that blocked my search for a way of defining qualities in terms of concrete elements or concrete elements in terms of qualities. The difficulty can be met by taking as primitive a dyadic predicate of classes rather than of individuals. That course flouts both the scruples of nominalism and the principle of economy, though the vast increase in complexity of bases could not at the time be accurately measured. Originally, however, the calculus of individuals was formulated in terms of the calculus of classes and was thus itself Platonistic. Its nominalization was effected in Chapter 1 of S.A., no cost beyond mere replacement of some axioms and definitions by schemata. Surprisingly, this very elementary, familiar, and by now, as logic goes, even old calculus is still raising questions that lead to new discoveries. So this is interesting. It's a section called Individuals, and he's talking about nominalism. And so nominalism and fictionalism are the idea that, well, you can pick it up and put it down. It's just a theory. We got a use-mention distinction, so we were just talking about things, not really of them. Yet it's kind of at a divide from what's otherwise the use the mentioned distinction, the saying of the words, the utterance of the words, the meaning of the text. When he describes the calculus of the individual, a calculus is usually intended to detail a formal method for the sensibility, fungibility, and tractability, and being the unambiguous, the cases of things, and the rulial and the regular, the rulial being another name for that which is the rule, or the exceptional or contingent, in a sense, of these things. And he mentions David Lewis instead of C.I. Lewis. The problem went unsolved, despite a bewildering crop of proposed formulae and an occasional misguided claim that correlated with the Skolem-Lowenheim theorem settled the matter negatively. The problem went unsolved until a couple of years ago when David Lewis, a former student of mine, and Wilfred Hodges produced an intricate but convincing proof that no such formula can be found. So now I see that as kind of a challenge, because it's talking about finitude and infinitude, and here there's been a lot of study of modern mathematics. So modern mathematics is often called set theory, but it's really set theory with the particular axiom of ordinary infinity. And so then a lot of things have been framed in that, and you point to Gödel and the incompleteness, and then with regard to your Cantor's transfinite cardinals, and as what those mean to be numbers of the infinite sort variety. Here they're plain infinite numbers by themselves. And so even there's a scalar infinity, there's an infinity 1.0, as it were, and then that it's not tractable is formulaic. It's simply that what it is and is not, and what may and may not be said of it is part of a wide dialectic and fuller discursive and deductive account of its properties and qualities as a quantity, vis-a-vis otherwise the simple rulial, which had excluded itself from being complete, at best, at its very beginnings, or after Mirimanoff raised the point that these ideals as absolutes are extra the ordinary, the ordinal, the ordered, that they're infinite in this way. That it goes without saying then that these philosophers, as they study these logical theories, has a formula satisfiable only in infinite domains. So when they say that something like that would be established negatively, it's like, actually these days, that's many efforts have been trying to establish that affirmatively. So this leads to this kind of idea. What is the fundamental universe of truisms? Is it affirmations or negations? So usual idea is that it's affirmations, that it's like there's a Comenius language and only well-formed formula are truisms and only truisms are well-formed formula. And so then the idea that they are the same kind of results one. But then and it so happens that kind of the first you can arrive at is negations, everything. Those build out the theory. So whether affirmations or negations are fundamentally the utmost substrate of this universal logical object, its universal logical objects, it has that I arrived at some point that negations were first. And then affirmations so follow that then it can be left aside and behind to that those truisms are generally considered to be affirmations, statements. So Lewis had pointed out that one formula for infinity, he spelled it with INFINITIY, which I imagine is typographical, but viz that viz is a shorthand for videlice, to associate. That every individual is a proper part of some other would, if taken as a postulate, make the calculus inconsistent. So not necessarily. Here we have that basically the entire context of the universe has that there's an apple, a prospective apple, and minus that in the context as a set or otherwise whatever is the fundamental relation or the collection of the things, that the whole context is the same thing. Its image is all the things that it is not. Now that sounds in a roundabout way entirely untrue, because directly it's entirely untrue. Something is not so what it is. That would be a paradox itself. But this is where from the entire outside of the context of the milieu's greater world and universe of the things, a one world, one saying of the things, that in this manner it can be seen that two things that are distinct are so related, even though they're each individuals and distinct. So they're still discernible, and they're still each well-defined and well-formed, while at the same time in a Platonistic universe where everything exists, this problem they found trying to develop their theory and close it off to all matters of impropriety has a way around it. So that's often what's been found in many of the greater having theoretical properties after the consequences of comprehension being sublime, as Kant puts it, greater than itself, has that's okay. And there are ways to look at it after starting with this dually self-inconsistency, a null axiom theory, a universal axiom theory, as being the same, and they might oscillate and vacillate and still be the same, resistant to meddling in this sense, a foundation, a ground for the Grund or ground, that then these kinds of things at least reflect upon. These philosophers are talking about very airy matters in philosophical logic, and it's related to the philosophy and the technical philosophy and the logic. There are any number of ad hoc logics. You can think of any reason you make a rule for anything and think it out that it's according to a logic. This is about the logic. So in this sense, it kind of arrives at, again, as mentioned here and discussed in extended duration, many reasonings why that's Platonistic again. That we ascribe all this great idea of a monadology that's universal, and then there's a univocity per duns scotus to Plato. And that the continental school arrives at the end, amicus Plato, without further ado. Jeffrey Hellman, taking as a guide the Zermelo-Fraenkel device of allowing only relative rather than unrestricted complementation, should how this might be accomplished, and instead of postulating existence of the negate of each individual x that is discrete from any other, postulate only the existence within any y of the negate of each x that is discrete from some part of y. So here we have our relevance logic, and so it's an important thing to distinguish the syllogistic reasoning with the Plotinus and other aspects of material implication that is not relevant for any two things that talk about each other that are not relevant to each other, as being able to say anything causal about them, material implication, that something's implied by those together. That here it seems he's making it a bit of a brief relevancy criterion. Hellman went on to argue that the calculus of individuals captures the intended notion of an individual. Well, that's great when it's intended up front that a generous reading is supposed to arrive at this, and this is what we have, vis-a-vis how it's to be figured out. That criterion as it applies to nominalist systems is here discussed in a revision of the structure of appearance. So this essay is the structure of appearance. So here we can see that they're working to build a nominalist, sometimes called fictionalist or fallibilist theory for our ontology, and this logicist positivism about the world of individuals, a symposium with Father Bochensky and Professor Alonzo Church. See, the Church-Roster hypothesis and some of these other things that arrive at their paradoxes or their negative statements as well have extraordinary alternatives. So one thing I studied in my slate of accountability arguments, or my slate of paradoxes logically that don't exist, and this slate of counterexamples to accountability in an absolute universe with ubiquitous ordinals, that as well as some of these other theorems about the branching problem or the Entscheidungs problem, or Gödel's inconsistency and incompleteness, either way, are arrived at not so necessarily so in this wider milieu. So in that sense, we can be both strong mathematical Platonists and strong logical positivists, be an axiomless natural deduction, all the theory. There's a superscientific, always has a place. Admiration for Gödel's incompleteness theorem does not make the result any more welcome. And it was mentioned Lowenheim and Skolem, and then Skolem was one of the great developers in the time of the originationist set theory that helped establish that there are these, it's wide open at the top, is what he did. And that's later kind of capped off by Paul Cohen with the independence of the continuum hypothesis, which employs ordinals and a turn of ordinals. So with regards to the Kuhnen hypothesis and elementary embedding, that's serious detailed is about this context and everything as it's not, that it arrives at this great way to look at these things rather thoroughly and holistically. See, absolutely about. So this Goodman, it reflects on that. It is very cool. He's talking about Frank Ramsey, Theories in the Foundations of Mathematics, edited by R.B. Braithwaite, London Routledge and Kegel-Paul in 1931, where Ramsey gets into the laws of large numbers. Ramsey's device, recently discussed by Bonert and by Scheffler, makes possible the elimination of extra logical bases by dropping constant primitive predicates in favor of quantified predicate variables. So here that's discussed in terms of the algebraic and the derived and the quantities and the implicits. There always are infinitely many quantifiers in front of a variable / constant. Such reduction to zero of the complexity of extra logical bases depends upon use of a rich logic. So here when we talk about logic, oftentimes it's in terms of terms, propositions, and relations, or terms, predicates, and relations, or just propositions by themselves. For the syllogistic is simple. For inductive only inference, and there's the constructivists, of course, will aver that it must be forward and never contradictory to be constructivist. That then there's all these things that go into why here these studies of Goodman are considered very relevant to the technical philosophy, and it represents the great school of the 20th century American school of the technical philosophy after and in the midst of logical positivism, and then as with regards to its logical content. So I'll be studying this quite a bit more thoroughly. Likewise, an n-place thoroughly symmetric and thoroughly self-complete predicate merely combines in all directions or applies to all permutations of every n elements of a set. And such an n-place predicate has the same complexity value as a single one-place predicate. Predicates are considered resolved to either true or false. And there's a world where they do and a world where they don't. And it's called tertium non datur. So there's a class of expressions which reflect predicates that are true or false. Review of Krebs, replacement of auxiliary expressions. the Journal of Symbolic Logic. In America, the Journal of Symbolic Logic and the Bulletin of Symbolic Logic are considered the premier venues of the American Society for Logic. Talks about induction, gives a riddle. That's fair. It's not complete. 7 strictures on similarity. Same and different key things. Well, see, one thing I wanted to mention is that I've been thinking about it, and it has to do with the stop derivative. So one of the mathematical constructs detailed here is a stop derivative. And what it is it's bridging for power law and differential from the higher powers, from infinity on down to 0, and then from negative infinity back up to 0. They're 2 different things. And what happens is from infinity on down to 0, it arrives at 0. But from negative infinity back up to 0, it arrives at a naturally logarithmic trace or the result or the basis is what it is. It's sort of a naturally logarithmic analytical character associated with the origin of arbitrary value equal to 1. And so the other day I was studying this book, Hodges and Pedoe, by the algebraic geometers. And in one of the diagrams of the group has that established that after the development and the definition of a group, the algebra's object, then there's a permutation groups, and then it showed an x by x group of these, or a table rather of these groups, and what it showed is that it has the identity carries one side and one way, but then also it's anti-identity according to the permutation group in this one ordering of the permutations that is giving every possible combination or every possible ordering of the things. Combination is a selection and a permutation is with an ordering. That then the diagonal, the anti-diagonal was the identity on back, and yet then had these items up and out and then back to the identity. So I looked at that and I noticed that according to that being a matrix of values, it would as well reflect to make a box, a windowing unboxing on the bias, as it were, of the stop derivative, just to go show that it's very close to the surface, something like that, and that's usually just left out of as algebra more generally, because after that brief mention in passing, it's like, we won't be coming back to this for a few years by the time we get through the rest of this curriculum. That it still sticks out as a primary sort of object itself for what symmetries it entails. It's got 3-way symmetry and as well an asymmetry. That it helps to affect or reflect that. That's just something I want to mention with regards to algebra and algebraic geometry and the stop derivative, helping to find, basically along the lines of like Lie groups and Lie symmetries would be so useful in differential analysis. This slightly asymmetric one would also fill a very particular role in some of these mathematical objects deemed to be of use in the mechanics of motion and these kinds of things. So that Goodman's really pretty great. Collingwood here, I picked this up. This book is the outcome of a conviction that unwillingness to face questions of method is the chief obstacle to the progress of contemporary philosophy. It attempts a systematic treatment of the methods and peculiarities of philosophical thought, disengaging the relations between philosophy on its formal side and science, whether mathematical or empirical. The argument is technical in character, but it is presented simply and directly, and it will appeal not only to experts, but to all who concern themselves with the problem of what philosophy is. Then the Times Literary Supplement says, it's important, significant, forms for all its brevity, one of the finest restatements in contemporary British philosophy of a Platonic and Hegelian metaphysic viewed from a modern standpoint. Technical terms, in philosophy, species of a genus. What stands firm is not its truth as theory, but the fact that it has actually been reached, the fact that we have experienced it. And in criticizing and demolishing it as a theory, we are confirming and explaining it as an experience. This is a section in deduction and induction. I picked up this great book the other day on Thomas Aquinas and Francis of Assisi by G.K. Chesterton. And in it, he says something along the lines of, like, I've never understood in syllogistic reasoning how people could ever think that they could do away with deductive analysis. And that just kind of goes to help reflect that what the author seemed to convey to me, as it spoke to me, that I really said that I do understand that. It's hypocritical. It's considered at best incomplete and easily wrong. It's a hazard, is what it is. A philosophy which defines its task. Anselm, Boethus, Plato. Categorical thinking, quality and quantity, the scale of forms. So this gets in an overlap of classes. So the classes are kind of like our words, and the forms are like our geometry. And algebra and geometry are two different things. And the one is fundamentally discrete, and the other is fundamentally continuous. One theory, all one theory. So I'll be looking to read that some more. Barnes and the Philosophical Predicament. Its title refers in the first place to the predicament of those modern philosophers who argue that the great philosophical questions of human destiny, the nature of the universe, and the existence of God are nonsensical, and that philosophy should confine itself to the analysis and clarification of common sense and science. Secondly, the title refers to the predicament of the speculative philosopher confronted by these attacks. In the course of his argument, the author expounds and criticizes some cardinal doctrines of Moore, Russell, Wittgenstein, and the logical positivists, while urging at the same time that there is much in these philosophies which can be put to the service of the speculative impulse. London, Adam and Charles Black. So, as you can tell from what I've just said recently, I find that very agreeably. The cardinal error of logical positivism is to deny reason in the name of logic. It's unstated assumptions. It's its axioms. C rule 1 is sometimes a thing. It's like C rule 1. What does that mean? It's like whatever it says. The argument from the necessity for a first cause has the illusion of an inductive argument. Neither deduction nor induction have any place here. And then he's talking about kind of like an argument in the metaphysics, the justification of metaphysics, and the super scientific. So he's talking in terms of kind of the theological terms of a reasoning. He talks about Carnap and the positivists. Behind the highly sophisticated conventionalism of Professor Carnap and the positivists lurks a naive and vague utilitarianism, which, if it were formulated, would take some crude form as, don't let us talk about the absolute, it gets us nowhere. But then he says that it is against lies, though, which is agreeable. Yet at the same time, a restriction of comprehension is not a truth. So this again is in a section Return to Reason. Helps effect to reflect that logical positivism is a great effort in a deconstructive account of then a minimalist approach to some rules that then make it so that anything or anyone would carry them the same way. About induction. And then is after the scientific method, and to be really strict in the scientific method and the design and development of statistical hypothesis vis-a-vis the empirical and just not wrong yet. That not wrong yet and absence and evidence and this kind of thing don't really relate. They're weak forms of logical positivism. Then the idea is that this strong form of mathematical Platonism and logical positivism go together. They've always been together. We attain to them. Then we can obtain from them these kinds of things. Let's see here. Well, reaching about the hour mark, I guess then that will be kind of like the start again of the studies into the philosophy. and the philosophical foreground, and a reasoning that there's a theory overall, at all, of it all, and that it's largely been considered by every thinker in this sort of field forever, and then it's arrived at many of the same things. Yet at the same time, we built this like modern mathematics, modern logical positivism, and then there's still this idea about how to approach it, so that then after Gödel's incompleteness, seen not as a weakness but as an escape hatch from otherwise a closed, incomplete theory that was eventually wrong, vis-a-vis Ramsey theory and laws of large numbers, plural laws of large numbers. That's what's to result then is that in this sort of manner for foundations, it will help to provide common language and common understandings, as they are, of the canon, the dogma, the doctrine, and a 21st century account of that for an axiomless geometry and A geometry and A numbers that's as well open to the higher infinites and these multiple laws of large numbers, multiple laws of convergence, multiple statistical limit theorems, reasonings to arrive at after Ramsey theory, and these kinds of things which get into emergence and these things that just don't make sense in the empirical setting yet, according to our fundamental theories of the statistical hypothesis, but of course are very, very much so of material import. That then this is just a part of the philosophical foreground to continue as carrying forward this way. Well, I shall so hope you have a great day, gentle readers, fellow earthlings.